Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and I think we ought to learn more about geothermal energy, don't you? I have a notion that it's the way of the future. So I'm going to go back to Jefferson Tester, who's a professor at Cornell University, an engineering professor, and he specializes in geothermal. And I talked to him about a year ago last May, and he showed me some things that he was working on. But he said he was, I think you said something like you didn't say you had a big secret, but I had the idea you were
Right.
working on some new project that you weren't ready to show me yet. But if I just wait and be patient, you'd be willing to.
Right.
So I've been patient. Now, are you going to show me some stuff today, Jefferson?
Sure. Sure. Well,
Okay,
thank you for the chance to come back and talk to
good.
you and to your audience. And what I'm going to talk about today a little bit is what we have done in basically the past year, more likely even the past few months, in drilling a deep exploration well right on the Cornell campus. And this is really a story that, is connected to anyone who lives in the part of North America, or for that matter, anywhere else it's where it's cold in the winter. And the goals that I know that you have with your show is to get people to think about what we're going to have to do in the future to be more sustainable. And part of that sustainability has to do with how we provide energy and how we utilize energy. And what I'm going to do is show you an example of what Cornell is trying to do, but I want you to be thinking of how this could be a demonstration that could go beyond what we're doing on our own campus, because to me it matters much more how we can actually change the world rather than just change a local single entity like a university. But we just happen to live in a place where we're ideally set up to sort of take the first step. So some people might refer to this as the early adopters or the low-hanging fruit. And in some ways that's true, but like anything else, to learn about what you have to make an assessment of the resources that are available. And the only way you find out about geothermal is by drilling a deep hole, basically, in the ground and identifying what's going on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'll switch over to screen share and then go back and forth so you can kind of get a rough idea of what we're up to. But these are just a few slides that'll give you an inkling of what we're up to. And then just please, we can take questions, Meta, from you or from others, whatever makes sense. All right, so let's try this screen share and see how this goes. So you're kind of looking at the introduction. So this is a lot about trying to do building heating by a low carbon sort of approach. And there are ways to do this that involve more than geothermal, but we think that geothermal, particularly the direct use of geothermal, might be the way of the future. It's done in some countries, not very extensively here. At Cornell, we kind of refer to this as earth source heat to kind of distinguish it a little bit from, the other interpretations of geothermal. We produce a lot of geothermal electricity where we're using geothermal heat for electricity in the U.S. In fact, the U.S. is the biggest provider of that. But this is really about using the heat directly in terms of powering radiators or heating and ventilating systems in buildings where we're taking advantage of earth that heat that's stored in the shallow earth, relatively accessible by drilling and using.
But not doing things like using turbines or creating electricity. Just you're using the heat directly.
Right. We're going to go to a heat exchanger where we typically, as you'll see soon, we typically take the heat that's available underground, bring it up to the surface, exchange that in terms of circulating hot water with another fluid that's also water, and that goes into a district energy system as we have at Cornell. So what you're looking at, this sort of first slide, is a kind of a schematic of what Cornell is actually trying to do. So it uses right now a lot of renewable electricity produced from hydro, from solar, and hopefully more closely in the future from a lot more wind, and it provides electricity to the campus. We also use a deep lake that we have available to us, Lake Cayuga, which is right near the campus. It's a very deep lake in the U.S. and has extremely cold water. at the bottom, which is about 400 feet or so, certainly more than 100 meters for sure. And it's cold there. It's just a few degrees above the freezing point of water. So it provides a very sustainable cooling source for the campus. The lake is incredibly large. It has 2.2 trillion gallons of water in it, and we use only a small portion of that during the summer, a very tiny portion actually, and to take care of cooling the campus. But heating is another story. We live in a heating dominated region of upper New York State, where the heating load can be at least double what the electric load is at any time on a cold day. And it's greatly in excess of what the cooling load is on an average cooling day versus an average heating day. So to put this more in real numbers, it's about 50 megawatts or so is the base heating load for the campus. But on the 20 or so really cold days that we have in the winter, it can go as high as 80 or 90 megawatts. The electric load's about 30. So it can be more than double to maybe even 3 times the electric load on the campus. And the cooling load, because we live in a colder climate here, at least temporarily anyways, it's a lot less than it is for the heating load. And we can take care of that with the lake. So that's sort of the idea here. But let's move along and see if I can get this thing to change slides there. I want to make sure you're at least aware of how big a deal this might be for not just the US, but if you can imagine sticking Canada on top of us and many other colder regions in the northern tier of the world, as well as the real southern tier, if you want to look at those places too. A lot more people living, obviously, in the northern tier of the globe. But so these states, which this sort of heat map shows you in darker colors, how much of their total energy sort of footprint is tied up with heating versus a combination of heating and electricity. So we've taken transportation out of this because that's going to be true wherever we are, because there's a big transportation load basically in any state in the US. And for that matter, I'm sure that's true in Canada as well, because of the distances between cities and all of the transport that occurs. So let's just look at heating versus electricity. So the darker those colors are, the more it's heating dominated. But you can see that if we go in the very southern tier, it's really not heating at all. It's all tied into electricity and or transportation. But in this northern tier, it's very much associated with heating. So in terms of carbon footprint, a lot depends on where the heat comes from versus where the electricity comes from. Some states have a lot of hydropower, they have more nuclear power, so they would be more carbon neutral for sure. But a lot of states in the US depend a lot on burning coal or natural gas, and so that will affect their carbon footprint. But in terms of carbon footprint for heating, it's almost always tied to fossil energy use. So as we look at that, 20 to 40.
Excuse me, but between in the US as between coal and natural gas, what's the ratio?
Well, it depends on where you live, right? I mean, and for instance, in New York, let's use that example to start with. We have no coal burning plants left at all. They're all either natural gas, nuclear, or hydro for electricity, and some solar and wind, of course, growing fast, but nowhere near as much as gas or nuclear right now, or hydro. But if we go to a state like West Virginia or some other states in the Midwest, where they're burning essentially all coal for electricity, it's a very different carbon footprint associated with. So it's like anything else, all politics are local, all environmental issues are local too, to a certain extent. So you have to kind of dig a little bit into the weeds to see, are we really talking about displacing coal to get to zero carbon, or are we displacing natural gas? In either case, we still got to do something. And New York State has surprisingly a low carbon footprint for its electric sector because we have a lot of hydro and we have a lot of nuclear and we're burning just gas. But for heating, it's all tied up with natural gas and fuel oil. So we have to really do something about it in a big way. So I cite in this slide that, there are at least 16 states now, and some of them are red states or blue states, it doesn't matter. They still have enormous goals set, very aggressive goals to decarbonize not just their electric sector, but their entire energy use, which includes transport and heating. And I don't think they quite have it right yet, because they really need a plan. They need a plan that is a systems sort of energy approach, rather than, oh, we'll just do solar or we'll do wind. They've got to think of it collectively all together. How are they going to solve all these problems? And that's one of the things where I think we've missed an opportunity as a country, at least in the US, to sort of think through what are the logical ways in which we can get the best out of all these alternative resources. And that's kind of why I'm so positive about the need for maybe thinking about how we deal with cold climate heating and how we deal with a carbon neutral way of doing that. So in this next slide, and I'll switch back to maybe take a few more questions in a minute here, but so Cornell has been really committed to this for a long time. Some almost 15 years now, they've been on a path to try to decarbonize. In the past few years, they've set a goal of trying to make the campus itself, in terms of its energy footprint, completely carbon neutral by 2035. That still will be a major task, but with lake source cooling, with a commitment to do renewable electricity, heating is the remaining big goal that they have to do. And we're thinking about the challenge of doing this, meeting it with what we call earth source heat. This is our version of an enhanced geothermal system that would use the internal heat of the earth to warm the campus without use of fossil fuels. If it's viable, and this was the point I started out with today, that I think this would be scalable and provide affordable renewable energy solution for the US and other places that have to deal with heating. So think about that. This is another kind of schematic of how this might look on our campus. We have a district.
Now, when you say scalable, I get the idea that you could, any one source of heat could cover, take care of a larger area around it. Is that what you mean by scalable? Or
yeah, I think that's true to a certain extent, Meta, but it also is, a lot of people work on a level which is their own home, okay, or an individual building within a city. And we can't think that way if we're really going to solve this carbon footprint issue. We have to think this is really a utility scale conversion. We have to go to ways in which we're going to provide heating for large communities, for concentrated areas of high population density where we have a lot of buildings together, and we can't necessarily put in our own system in our house to do it. You know, we deliver, just think of how we deliver electricity. We deliver it through wires to everybody's house. We don't have everybody with an electric generator in their home, although now people are putting solar panels on the roof and things like that, so they're becoming a kind of micro utility themselves. But that also presents problems, or challenges, I should say. But in heating, what we do right now is we either deliver natural gas to that house and burn it in a furnace, so we have an infrastructure to do that, or a fuel oil truck comes up and puts oil in a tank in your basement, and you do it that way. A few people might still use wood, and some use electric heating, which makes, you know, very, very unsustainable sense when you think about it, because we have to make electricity first by burning fossil fuels, and then we go back and turn it back into heat. It's much
okay,
better.
now let me guess what you're saying. You're driving at the notion of district heating, where you have one heating plant that takes care of a whole bunch of different buildings, right?
Right.
But you have to build that in when you're building your buildings.
Absolutely, right. And so you need to think, that is why we haven't done this in the same way a lot of European cities have done it. Or if we take, for instance, a country like Iceland, one of my favorite examples, they depended 100% on imported energy some half a century ago. They had to put in the infrastructure to take advantage of their really high-grade geothermal resources, but they did it. Okay, so it became a national imperative. We have to do this because it's going to make us more economic. They weren't worried about environment 50 years ago. That's a different story now. So I claim that if we really want to be carbon neutral and more sustainable in the long run, we're going to have to make an investment in transforming our infrastructure. Now, you might say, well, maybe this is the right time for it. You know, I don't know so much about all the Canadian cities, but there are a lot of American cities that their infrastructure is failing terribly.
Well, I'm just trying to, I live in a high-rise condo, I'm just trying to imagine what they'd have to do, because my heat comes in something along the baseboards, along the
Right.
floor, where there's warm water going through. But I'm sure
Exactly.
we have our own boiler and things
Right.
like that.
Yeah, you have your own boiler. So you probably wouldn't throw out your boiler. That would become a backup system. But instead of delivering the fuel that's powering that boiler, we would deliver hot water to you, just like they do in Iceland. In fact, there are plenty of other locations in Europe. In Paris, for instance, they're doing this quite extensively, taking advantage of a low temperature aquifer that they have access to. I think they're heating like 1 million homes now in the Paris Basin. We certainly, I think well over 90% of the whole Icelandic country is heated with geothermal. And many of it is a remote region too, much like Canada and parts of the US. So they had to lay piping out to long distances to bring hot water. So they're metering hot water to those homes instead of metering electrons or electricity or the amount of gas you consume. So it will take that transition. But frankly, we're going to have to make a lot of transitions anyways, right? And so I'm excited about the fact that finally our politicians are beginning to realize that infrastructure is a good thing, keeps us competitive economically, eventually provides a more affordable and livable environment. So why not fix up the way we heat buildings?
Okay, I'm just trying to make trouble for you. Now let me make this trouble, because
Good.
I don't know why. Why is it that you would want to use? Okay, look, my main thought is, when you have heat, you're going to lose some of it just moving it around. I would have thought you'd lose more heat by transferring it from one building to another or all over a city than you would lose electricity if you were shooting electricity out.
Excellent question, Meta. And it's usually one that even my students have, because they can't believe you can transmit hot water long distances and not lose a lot of energy. Well, that's not true. In fact, I had a big wake-up call myself to this when I visited Iceland a few years back. They have some geothermal power plants that are some 60 kilometers away from the city of Reykjavik, and they run hot water in insulated pipes. Most of it's above ground because of the earthquake issues in Iceland, and they lose very little temperature in transmitting it that long distance. Admittedly, they have to pump it, but it's in very large diameter pipes, well insulated, and they lose just a few degrees centigrade transmitting at 60 kilometers. Cornell has its own heating distribution system now that has hundreds of kilometers of piping under the ground already, been in place for a long period of time. We lose a little bit more than that because it's old piping and wasn't well insulated, but the campus now, the college or university, is committed to going to low temperature hot water circulation, not steam, which has been traditional in district heating systems. And the losses are much lower for that. In fact, as you're saying, you get hot water through your baseboard, but you're burning a fossil fuel at well over 1,000 degrees centigrade to give you that hot water. We're going to provide you with hot water slightly warmer than what's going to circulate through your radiators and through your heat distribution system in the building. It's unbelievably effective to do this because the efficiency goes up significantly, but it doesn't come without cost. You've got to put in the piping and the heat exchangers to do that. But the benefit is long-term, right? You're not buying natural gas every year. You're not living with the uncertainty or fluctuations of prices, but you're making a long-term infrastructure investment, just like we do with electric wires, just like we do with building roads and putting in hot water and sewer lines. But America, unfortunately, doesn't think this way. But if we go to another country, they do think this way. So I think
how much is it? Logically, the stuff is free out of the ground, but somebody's got to get it to us. And so, how cheap will it be? Will it be?
This is a really
compare it to the cost of the whatever. Say I switch over from whatever they're doing with the boiler to your system. How much difference will I be paying?
This is another wonderful question. You're asking the same kind of questions that we have to deal with when we talk to our own administrators here at Cornell. Mm-hmm. What is it going to cost? So the first is, do you have a goal, right? And you do. If you have a goal to go to zero carbon, there will be a cost of infrastructure for sure, but it's not a 1-year investment. So the financing of that is very different than it would be just buying natural gas per year or buying electricity from a utility. So the economics of that financing of the infrastructure are different, but you're absolutely right. You've got to still drill holes and you've got to create an underground system, and it doesn't come for free. So what we've done is a very careful analysis, what we call, to come up with a levelized cost of heating. And we compare that with what the campus right now and the various units at Cornell are being charged for heating. And when you get your bill for natural gas, you're not just paying the cost of that natural gas that's provided by a wholesaler, you're paying the distribution cost as well. So that's built into the charge that a utility would charge you if they were piping hot water to your house. You're still going to need something in your house, so there'll be some conversion there, but that's a pretty simple one because you're just using a heat exchanger at that point. So my feeling about this is that you've got to look at the total numbers and look at how it would be financed. You know, if it's financed by a public-private partnership, which would be certainly true of utility energy being delivered, and then there's a charge rate that's effectively covers the cost of infrastructure plus the cost of putting in that reservoir system underground, it looks pretty attractive. In fact, we think it's actually cheaper than buying natural gas right now and running it through our power plant as a cogen plant, because we have to pay off the investment that we made in that power plant, which is admittedly efficient, but it's incredibly expensive to buy it. It will last a long time, just like our reservoir hopefully will, but we still have to prove that the underground system will work. And that carries with it risk and front-end financing that is very different than just buying natural gas and building a power plant. So it's a really great question, but you've got to kind of get into the details. But the bottom line is the levelized cost of heating looks very attractive if we're able to achieve, as I show on this picture. Let me go back to that just for a minute here. So if we look at this little reservoir that's set over here where you see the different layers, if we can produce enough fluid out of a set of well pairs, this is one well pair that we're showing here.
I'm not seeing it.
Oh, you're not seeing it? Okay, maybe I didn't share it. Did I share it? How about now? Do you see it now?
No.
You don't?
Now I do.
Okay, so this over on the right-hand side of this diagram is a sort of depiction of what the reservoir might look like. And there's a so-called power plant or heat exchanger that's right there at the surface.
Okay, now I don't understand the word reservoir. I was looking at that lake over there. That looks like a reservoir.
Well, that is a reservoir, but a rock reservoir is also, this is an underground reservoir in impermeable or fractured rock that we show down here that's hot enough to be of value for heating the campus. That would be at about 100 degrees C or less. In fact, we could even go down to 80 degrees centigrade or so, or Celsius, and still have a workable system. So what we have to be able to do is to prove that when we pump water down that blue well and circulate it through that rock and bring it up the red well, which would be the hotter well, that it's sustainable and that it produces enough fluid to balance the investment that would be made in drilling those holes and in creating that reservoir system. So it's a rock reservoir that's got water circulating through it. That's almost typical of any geothermal plant, whether it makes electricity or whether it's used for direct use. So what we had to prove, what we're in the process, and this is the new activity that I want to talk about, is we had to explore this subsurface, look at the subsurface to identify whether or not the geology and the temperatures were going to be right to bring us to the next stage. So let me go to the next slide here. So this was the step for Cornell, drilling a deep exploration well to a depth of about 3 kilometers, 10,000 feet or so. And we just completed this month. In fact, last week or so, we completed the drilling of this hole. So there's a lot of information that I can share with you today, but we're still in the process of analyzing it. But to get to the point where we could do that, we had to raise the funds for drilling this hole. It's not inexpensive, believe me, to drill a single hole. It's well instrumented and it will be studied for for a year or so to really identify different regions of the subsurface that might work. So here's the kind of concept for this. This is what we call a borehole observatory. So since this is a teaching institution, and it's also an institution that's committed to go to low carbon, we're trying to develop this as kind of within the context of what we call a living laboratory, where fundamentals of earth science and engineering could be done collaboratively, but we also provide a well that can help us to test this earth source heat or ESH concept that we're talking about. So it helps to bring down the technical risks and uncertainties and should make it easier to raise the kind of capital we're going to actually put in a real district heating system for the campus. It also tells us a lot about potential hazards or environmental impacts that we can take a quantitative look at. But most importantly, it's not just about doing the demonstration. It provides a wonderful laboratory where our students and others can learn from how we now have access to this deep environment to learn about the subsurface. So it's certainly compatible with the university set of goals and objectives. And so that's the point of having this exploration well. In this diagram, this sort of yellow well here that goes down through these different layers. Each one of these layers is a different sedimentary section. And the part at the bottom, which shows this sort of, I guess it would be kind of a reddish and orangish type set of colors, is in the so-called crystalline basement rock, of which you've got plenty of in Canada.
I see. Here you've got a legend here that explains it, but I can't see it very well.
Well, we're going to give you
We've got limestone. Now, the bottom layer is crystalline.
Yeah, let me go to a better one here. This is much better. Okay, so this is the actual stratigraphic section or the lithology from the surface up here at 0 feet or 0 kilometers, where we're going through some unconsolidated things and then through a set of different types of sedimentary rocks, including salt layers, shale layers, limestone. They're all named here according to different formations that we have in the region. Many of them contain natural gas, which has been produced over the years in New York and other locations. But eventually we get down to this deeper section at about a little bit over 9,000 feet or so. This is the bottom of the hole we just finished, 9,790 feet, roughly 3 kilometers, as I said. But it's just barely into the basement rock or the crystalline basement by about maybe a few hundred feet or so. So you can see the different color coding here. Limestone, dolostone, that's dolomite type thing, shale and mudstone, organic rich shales that would contain kerogen or natural gas as well, sandstones, halite, which is basically salt layers. We got a lot of salt here in our region, active salt mines that are being produced and have been for a long time. And then some other layers, anhydrite, gneiss, amphibolo-gneissic things, and crystalline basement. So the geologists know a lot about this area, but the well itself was able to validate this conclusively in terms of the cuttings and core material that we examined. So the target regions that we're looking at for geothermal are kind of in this region up here that you see some of the red arrows that are shown on there, as well as in the basement. So we've identified several of those ahead of time, and we validated that with drilling this hole. But there'll be a series of tests that are eventually completed on those zones to characterize the rock permeability, the presence of fractures that could be open and become conductive transport, channels, if you will, for water to be circulated, as well as validation of the temperature. We're pretty sure that the temperature at the bottom now, based on preliminary measurements, is roughly in excess of 90 degrees centigrade. So there's no question that the hole is warm enough. And although this is one-dimensional, we think it's more representative of the entire region that we would have at these depths. So
how did you dig that hole? What was this?
With a very expensive drill rig that is used very much in today's conventional technology for oil and gas. In fact, the rig came up from Pennsylvania. It takes a lot of 18-wheelers to bring it on campus, and it's very expensive to move it. But they do this all the time. They go from site to site. So once we had the rig here, we were drilling with conventional rotary drilling technology. They know very much how to drill through all of this colored regions here because that's exactly the regions they explore for oil and gas production in Pennsylvania and earlier in New York and in West Virginia. But they don't know a lot about the basement because they're not going to find fossil fuels in crystalline basement. So they usually stop when they get to that. But nonetheless, this was a little bit different well, and some of the things that are than a conventional oil or gas well. One, it's bigger diameter. We needed a larger diameter because we wanted to use bigger instrumentation, but we'll also eventually need larger diameters for making production and injection wells for the geothermal system because we're circulating a lot of water through.
How big is it? How's the whole big, wide is it?
So the lower portion down here at the very deep is about 8.5 inches. The upper portion is about 17.5 inches. All right. And this middle portion is about 12. So those refer to the open hole depth. So in this section here where it says, I think 12 and a quarter inches. Sorry about the inches. This is pretty standard for oil and gas technology, standard casing sizes. We have a casing that's a 9 5/8 inch casing inside of this 12 and a quarter inch well. And this gray crosshatched section on outside of those casing strings is cement, where that's all cemented in place to provide a good isolation from the rest of the formation. So we can focus just on the open hole section in the bottom of the hole, which is where we're looking at the reservoir stimulation possibilities for a geothermal system. So that's why we're calling it an observatory. All right. And it really provides an excellent way to, sort of map out how we're going to take the next steps. So we're very positive about this. It cost a tremendous amount of money to drill this, and it will continue to inform us as we go forward because it also provides a monitoring hole for.
I've heard that the real problem with geothermal, the real technological difficulty is the hole, just the technology of digging deep enough.
Well, I don't think that's true. This is a conventional depth. They drill holes much deeper than this I
know. I mean, I actually want to. I'll bring this up later, but I don't want to deflect from what you're saying. Except to say that I want to get in touch with those people who are doing, going like 10 miles down because they're using something called fusion or something like that.
Oh yeah. Well, that's pretty aspirational. They're claiming they're going to go that far, but we haven't done that yet. Okay. The deepest holes that have been drilled have been about 40 something thousand feet. Okay. This is a 10,000 foot hole. So 4 times deeper, but they're incredibly expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars. This particular well, when we instrument everything and when we count everything, will be of order of $10 million or so. It would be much less going forward because we wouldn't need all of this sophisticated testing because we've done that now. Okay, there would be more production holes. So that's a big question as to how we can bring down those costs. But we're using conventional costs now for drilling at these depths, which this technology has been around for a long time. But if we're going to go to 10 miles, that's 50,000 feet or deeper. We could do geothermal anywhere, even in the colder regions of Canada, where you have the Canadian shield rock right at the surface. So where the temperature gradients, how fast temperature rises with depth are lower, but the cost will be higher. And so it'll all become a question of how much fluid can you get through that 2-well system and how long will it last? And I'm pretty optimistic that this will occur over time. Look what we've done with the cost of wind power and solar power by just kind of building up our capabilities around this idea. We can make it more efficient. We can manufacture things better. We can more sort of organize the way in which we're going to drill holes and complete holes for geothermal applications rather than for oil and gas. But the ability to do it is there. That's not a limitation right now. The costs are high, for sure.
And it's going to stay high. In other words, you think this thing about fusion, and I looked at, they have a machine, something, gyro something.
Yeah, sure. Right. Gyroton, right. Which it does plasmas and things like that. I'm not Look, part of my research over time has been associated with advanced drilling techniques. I think the research is good and appropriate, but it is not ready for prime time yet. And we have a lot of work ahead of us in the next 30 or 40 years. It will probably take that long to bring it to full scale where you could call up a local drilling company and it comes in and drilling a plasma hole for you. I'm not optimistic that this is going to be easy. The one, it's like sort of replacing internal combustion cars. I mean, that doesn't occur overnight, even though we have options right now, because it takes a while to get to the manufacturing capability and the proof of the concept where people will buy into it. So it isn't that we shouldn't be doing it, but to count on having to get plasma to drill holes is not necessary right now. We can drill holes with conventional drilling, but we could drill them perhaps better and cheaper in the long run. But let's start at least with what we have now. We don't have to wait 30 years. We can get on with this now. Geothermal development is ready to be developed now, particularly in high grade areas. There are plenty of hotter regions, like Ithaca is one example of that, where the temperature gradients are higher locally. We don't have to drill in the lowest grade areas to start with. This is the kind of, let's go after the early adopters and the low grade, low hanging fruit. It's not that it's really hot here like it is in the Western US or Western Canada, but it is still warmer than the average. And that makes it a little bit shallower that we have to go to get to those temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm discouraged because I thought these guys with their gyrotron or something were going to do it next week.
Right.
You
Well,
say it's
ask them how far they are along.
Well, I haven't got that. I haven't been able to get in touch with them yet, but I thought I would. Maybe it's just premature to even talk to them. Do you think?
Well, I guess it's never it's never bad to have an idea to talk to them about their aspirational goals, because I think they're all good. But
maybe I know. Maybe I'll have you interview them with me.
Yeah, well, they might not like that, right? Because look, I'm optimistic about what they're trying to do, but I also think that it's dangerous to promise too much without field work that comes up behind it. Until we saw electric vehicles being made and manufactured so we could buy them, I think there were a lot of people that were skeptical. Now I think they're becoming believers, that we can do this, and I know we can do it. I think we can do district heating in an early stage that's pretty easy to adapt. We don't have to have a gyroton or plasmas or fusion drilling or things like that to make it work. That would make it better, perhaps, and more accessible in the long run. But let's get started. I mean, you and I both are old enough to know we don't have 100 years left to get this.
Yeah, I'm working on trying to make a list of 4 things that Canada can get going within 5 years and show some results with.
Right. So. Well, there's many, many good things that can be done. And I think we have to get people to believe that a system approach makes a lot of sense right now. We can't just rely on any one thing. And I like the idea of having kind of a holistic view where let's try to make the whole thing better. And it's one of the reasons we've also been interested in waste biomass. I'm not talking about that today, but if you think about the things that we use and generate and don't really take full advantage of because of their energy content or their nutrient content, we could do a much better job. We're capable of humans of being much better at this.
You're talking about waste biomass for heating?
Well, could be for heating, could be even for transportation fuels, but most of all, it could be for to recover the nutrients, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, which we now lose. And we basically, we mine phosphorus to grow crops so we can feed, lots of billions of people of us in the world. And we don't necessarily recover that phosphorus. It gets diluted and ends up back in the ocean or into the river basins and presents its own problems there. But it's lost forever in a sense, in terms of where nitrogen's a little easier because it's in the air, but we produce a lot of the ammonia and ammonia grade fertilizers we need by burning natural gas to make hydrogen to convert nitrogen into ammonia, which we have in the air. So it has a big carbon footprint associated with it right now. So we just have to get better at this. It's kind of a classic problem of closing the open loops that we have for mass and energy. And heating buildings is one, but food is another. And making ourselves better on water would be a big plus too, right? Especially now with the gross district. I don't know what it's been like in Canada, but the US is suffering from too much water in certain regions and no water in others. And we've got to solve this problem. We're smart enough to do this, but we can't wait for 50 years.
I agree. That's my middle name these days. We can't wait for 50 years. Onward. I've deflected you from where you were going. Now, where were we?
Well, I don't think I don't really have any more slides.
Okay.
My feeling is more, if you're comfortable with the idea that, district heating could be done fairly rapidly, we have to make sure the costs work. We have to de-risk the subsurface, make sure the reservoirs are there. But the really good news is a lot of people have done this. And it isn't like we're inventing a whole new technology. We're learning how to use the tools that are available to us now, particularly from oil and gas drilling and from geophysics and other technologies that have been around for a long time in a slightly different way. We're trying to circulate water through hot rock or to take advantage of shallower systems that might have a lot of water present that's warm enough to use, bringing it up to the surface, exchanging the heat and putting it into an infrastructure. So it's not very glamorous, it's not like inventing a whole new solar technology or something, but it is actually very accessible and should make people feel good because it allows them to connect to the earth a little bit better. The sort of new theme for geothermal is geothermal energy is something that we use the earth to save the earth. And in a way, this repository that our wonderful planet is saved for us near the surface of all this stored heat can be much better utilized than we have in the past.
Well, I'm aware of that, but I'm wondering, is it constant? I mean, if you go down, what is it, 3 miles? Is that where you're going down?
Or we're 2 miles now, 10,000 feet, a couple of miles. Yeah.
Now, if everybody in the world goes down exactly the same depth, are we going to all hit the same amount of temperature?
Well, no, right. Okay, that's the first question. No, that will not be true. Let me. I have some extra slides here. Let me show 1 or 2 of these, if you'll let me here. And since I'm controlling it, I guess I can do this. Let me go to the extra slides. You should see these now. Okay.
Will it depend on the kind of sediment that you happen to end up in?
Right. I'm going to show you a map of the U.S. here, okay? I apologize for not having Canada on here. This is at 4.5 kilometers, okay, deep, which is deeper than we are now, but it's not that excessive. We can easily drill that now, but it's mainly to show you the great diversity of resources that you have in a country like the U.S. So the hotter temperatures in blue and red are up here very hot, okay? They're 300 plus, 250 centigrade. The cooler temperatures are down in this region, maybe they're still warm, 100 degrees or above. And then the really cold temperatures are down here at near room temperature. And you can see that there are certain regions in the mid-continent, up in the Sierra Nevadas and over here in the northern parts of Vermont and New Hampshire and parts of New York, where it is pretty cold. This would be very typical of what you might have in parts of Canada, where you'd have to go deeper than 4.5 kilometers to get to temperatures that you could use for district heating. But this section here from New York down through Pennsylvania and into West Virginia is the Appalachian Basin. It's been extensively drilled for oil and gas. So there are thousands of wells, maybe 30, 40,000 wells drilled where we know the temperatures at the bottom and we know how deep they are. So we can kind of map out what the temperature gradients might be. So that's a result of a lot of study that's gone on. We've also drilled a lot of holes in the western part of the country. You can see here, Yellowstone shown up here in the
Well, I was looking for the purple, and that's the only purple I see on the whole U.S.
Right, but it's also a place.
Oh, wait a minute. There's one in Northern California, a little dot of purple.
Right, and that's also up here, the Geysers Field, which is the biggest geothermal field in the world right now for electric power. that's been developed for about the past 50 years. And it will continue to produce power. So the first question you're asking, we can find plenty of regions that are hot enough. You know, Ithaca is right up here where we see this sort of yellow region here, where at 4 kilometers we'd be well over 100. Well, we're proving we've got to that. We're at 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, I'm sorry, 3 kilometers, and we're already at close to 100 degrees. So that's showing that we do have realistic, validation of these temperature maps. So what the next question, though, that I'm sure you're about to ask is, how long do these things last? You know, we're continually putting cold fluid back down into the ground. It's not an infinite source of heat, because if you go back to a few of my earlier slides, let me just go back to one, which, let's see. Yeah, we can even just look at this slide. This is good enough. So if we just think of the reservoir like this, where colder fluid is going down into the ground continuously and passing through a bit of rock, and then it comes back up as hot fluid. All right. So in that region where that cold fluid is injected, it's extracting heat from the surrounding rock, and locally it's going to cool off. But what you need to do, and I have my students do this too, because it's not obvious that it should be like this. The volume of rock that you're actually contacting is very large, and because it's large in terms of its volume, it has a lot of stored heat in it, albeit at low temperature relative to, you know, really, really hot rock. It's still warmer, much warmer than that circulating fluid. So the sustainability of this over time might be a period of like 10 or 20 years. And it all depends on how fast you extract it from this region of injecting cold water. Now, one of the great activities that's coming out a result of our work and other people's work is we don't have to heat all year round. We're not living in the far northern regions of the Northwest Territory or Antarctica. So during the summer, we can actually recharge that other cooled off region by injecting warmer fluids back down into the injection region rather than colder fluids. So that's one way of sustaining the lifetime. But if we do run out and the stick gets too cold over a period of time, we can drill other holes. And so we just have to go a few meters away, maybe 100 meters away from that in the subsurface.
But you couldn't just keep going deeper?
No, we don't. Well, that's more expensive. It might be better to just go sideways and drill at the same depth, but to drill another well that deviates away from that region. Okay. And so that's a standard technique that's used. And a lot of geothermal field developments have been in existence for a long time. One's in Italy for over a century. The geysers fields now for over 50 years. So there's plenty of stored thermal energy in that crust. We just have to get good at extracting it sustainably. But those are the two critical questions for sure.
Okay, now how big an area could you serve with one hole? You've got the Ithaca campus, the Cornell campus.
Great question.
Could you serve all of Ithaca?
Well, we could, but not just with one. First of all, we're going to need 2 holes, right, as a minimum, because we have to always inject and produce.
Right.
So for the campus, let's keep this in mind. The campus has roughly 30,000 of us. I talked about what the heat load was in the winter, 50 megawatts and 90 megawatts.
30,000 what?
30,000 people, students, faculty, staff, and a lot of laboratories, a lot of square footage of building space. We have greenhouses. We even melt some of the snow on parts of the street and things like that to lower the risks associated with that. But there's a huge amount of heat use. But it wouldn't be that much different than Toronto, or for that matter, Ottawa, or for Montreal, in terms of per square foot of building or square meter of building. You're still going to have that big heating load. So what you have to think about is, we think that with the proper design of the subsurface system, based on what we know now from drilling this first Kubo well, that we'll probably need about 4 well pairs to take care of the whole campus. Okay, now that's what we put into the economic analysis to come up with this levelized cost of heat, which is below what we're paying right now for a natural gas system that's supplying district heating for the campus, but not from the earth, from burning fossil fuels and also producing electricity and supplying it to an infrastructure. So I think that it's very interesting ahead of us. What I hope I can come back in a year, assuming we're all here, and tell you about the first set of the first well pair we drill and how it's testing. And whether
What do you mean, the well pair? You're going to do it, dig another hole?
Yeah, we're going to dig 2 more holes, right, to start with. Because it's like any kind of subsurface development, whether it's minerals or oil and gas, you don't try and do it all at once. You do it to prove and de-risk the stages. So this is a phased operation. The first phase would prove that we can prove it at the scale of 2 wells. Then beyond that, we can just drill in the other wells and proceed. And that's like any geothermal field. They have to prove that they have enough production, enough temperature that they can build a power plant. And that's what we're doing. We have the power plant already, but we're providing it with natural gas heated water or steam. What we want to do is provide it with earth source heated water, right? And so that's what we're trying to do. So the first well pair will be the big test. If that
So now, back to my Ithaca question. How many people live in Ithaca? I've forgotten how
well,
big
it depends on how you count. You know, if you don't count the permanent, if you just count the permanent residents, we're probably talking about 150,000. Okay, but we provide, by the way, in the lake source cooling operation, in order to get community buy-in, we provide cooling for the high school complex, which is right near the base of the lake as well. We would love to do district heating for the town. Why not? Right? But then the town is going to have to get away from individual furnaces in everybody's house. So
now who would pay for that? I mean, it'd be the individual owner who'd have to pay to have his whole pipes brought into his.
Well, I hope it doesn't. I hope it wouldn't be the individual owners, because this has got to be a public-private partnership, right? I mean, the rate that we pay right now, I pay about for the little bit of natural gas I use at my house, because I have a geothermal heat pump system. It's about $15 a million BTUs. And that's what people are paying right now to have natural gas delivered to their home. So I would envision that there would be a transformation from that to cover the cost, long-term bonds that would have to be municipal bonds that would have to be invested to put in the district heating infrastructure. And then you would buy the hot water at some sort of reasonable rate, similar to the way you're buying natural gas. So it may cost the same in terms of what you're paying out of your pocket, but it doesn't carry carbon. And so there's nothing.
Yeah, but now you say you don't want individual households, but they would now if you, like in mine, I have the baseboard that's already got hot water running through it. But a lot of people will I don't know what they have, but they have other systems of heating. They'd have to switch over to.
Well, they do have to switch, and so
that would be their own. Once
it could be, but there could be incentives for it, right? I mean, we've done an enormous amount of incentives already. There in America, we have a lot of individual septic systems for taking care of sewage. A lot of them are going to municipal systems because the individual ones fail, and so in doing that, there has to be sort of a public-private agreement on how would they pay for that, right? So they now, they'd have to switch from not paying anything for sewage to paying something, but then they don't have to worry about refurbishing their septic system after a few years when it fails or they can't sell their house. So I think it has to need some really intelligent people that are on the policy and financing side to make this work. Someone's got to have enough vision to say, this is not a change for tomorrow. This is a change for the next 50 years, and we've got to gradually do it. We had the president of Iceland here, former president of Iceland, a few years back at Cornell, and we asked him exactly the same question. And I think
is that Oliver Grimson?
Right, Oliver Grimson. Right,
I know him.
Wonderful guy, right? But they have a new president now who's equally enthusiastic about this. But someone, I think it was one of the students, asked him a question. Well, how did you do this? And he said, well, we did it literally house by house and street by street. And eventually we covered the whole thing. It didn't occur overnight. It took many years to get there. But we have to start somewhere, Meta. And I think Cornell at least has the ability to start quickly and show people that it works. It's not going to happen overnight in Toronto or Albany or New York City or some other major thing. But Let's get started, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what's your next? Where do you think this first steps will be?
Well, we're going to use the same site that we drilled this exploration well, because we can deviate wells very easily now with today's technology. So the heating system would be right where the Kubo site was drilled on campus, and it's right efficiently located where it could be easily connected to the district heating system. So the surface footprint of the whole geothermal operation is right there. It takes about 2 acres. We don't think it'll be any bigger than that for the whole campus. So people will not see anything different other than a set of wellheads at the surface that serve that heat exchange system. But we have to drill these next 2 wells, and that's hopefully will be done sooner rather than later.
Well, can you do it faster than you, now that you've done it once?
I think we can, and hopefully a lot cheaper, Meta, right?
Yeah.
A lot lower cost. That's the big hope. We have a lot of companies now and utilities that are interested in this. And I think they view this as a potential, not just market for Cornell, but a future for them. Some of them are oil and gas companies that have to make their own transformation. Others are just people that provide utility energy right now. We have it right in our region, New York State electricity and gas. They know they can't be providing gas forever. So maybe they'll become the New York State electricity and heating company and provide hot water. So they would have to figure out ways, working with the state, working with federal incentives, to put in the infrastructure and then charge people for it over the long term. They can't pay it to start with. It'd be crazy. No homeowner could pay for putting in the infrastructure. They could probably pay something to fix their own house up, but that will have to have incentives too, particularly if they have electric heat. That would be really bad. And then they're going to have to put in radiators and things like that. Cornell, just to give you an idea, in transforming the Cornell campus from its old steam system to a low temperature hot water system is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But it's not invested 1 year. They do it building by building, street by street, and they've transformed a big portion of the campus already. But it's taken them 10 years to get there. So they're on the good path, and we have not started that path on most cities in the U.S.
No, I think most people are going to say, well, it looks to me like turbines and solar panels are a lot cheaper.
Well, not for heating, they're not going to be, that's for sure. I think they missed the story, which I'm trying to get across, is that it's not just about electricity. Solar, photovoltaics, and wind are great for electricity. Two problems. One, they're not on all the time. And in the wintertime, when you really need them, the solar is not functional, right? I mean, it doesn't work at night. We have a terrible capacity factor for solar in the northern tier of the U.S. In Ithaca, for example, it's on the coldest days, it's maybe you're lucky if you get 1% of the power rating out of a photovoltaic system. In the summer, it's great. But where do you store that energy? You put it into the grid. It's not stored seasonally. This is a way nature has stored the energy seasonally for us with geothermal. We just have to figure out how to make it work better, and it complements the other renewables. It doesn't replace them, it complements them. We're not going to make electricity with 100-degree water very efficiently, but we need something that actually handles the seasonal load of heating. And that's the message, okay?
I got the message. Looks to me wonderful. I wish we could do it today. So good luck with it. Thank you for sharing this, and maybe I'll come back in another year and see what you've got done by then.
Yeah, and if people do have any questions, pass them on to me or so.
I will. Okay.
You stay healthy and keep positive. Okay.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Take care now. Bye now.
Project Save the World produces 2 of these shows each week. This is episode 498. Watch or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can subscribe for $20 Canadian per year. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser And in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see buttons to click to subscribe.